Hello, my name is Ella, and this is my submission for my Section 2 assignment on the podcast Babies Buying Babies. These are my notes that I took, and now I'll jump into my assignment. So, you ask us to consider how race, class, and gender emerged in the toy store. So, to start with, where the toy store is actually set. So it's in New York. Obviously, living in New York is very expensive. You have a lot of people who raise families there that are very, very wealthy, living in these huge, luxurious penthouses. So there we already have class emerging, and for these little kids that are raised by these families, obviously they get the best of the best. They're going to these toy stores and getting all of these expensive toys, whatever they want. Spoiled children are literally mentioned word for word exactly in the podcast, in the transcript. And so class has already emerged by the setting and the fact that this is an expensive toy store. This is not like the dollar store where you can just go to the corner and get your child a small toy. And these dolls are kind of like a symbol of that wealth. Like, oh, my child has this doll, and it was, like, you can tell it was expensive because it's this certain type of doll, and you have to be invited through the white picket fence, which is literally a very clear symbol of that like luxurious like white picket fence. Whenever you think of that, you think of like the ideal household with like the perfect family and two parents, and they're wealthy, and they kind of have like this little perfect life. And so next I want to talk about gender. Gender emerged several times throughout this in different ways. Specifically, I want to first begin by talking about the roles in the toy store. So the manager was a man and the workers were women. So that already places roles where a man is the boss and the women are like submissive to what the boss wants, which is already employing natural gender roles. And the fact that they have to walk around in nurse uniforms also further enforces stereotypes, as women are normally seen as like the nurses and the caring gender, in contrast to a male who is seen as more dominant and controlling. Even though males can also be nurses, we were not told that there was any male workers in the store, only the boss. And I also want to talk about race really quickly, even though that comes in kind of towards the end, because you wanted us to consider each in isolation. So, of course, whenever the media was utilized as like a real life way to, you said, how they intersect in powerful and meaningful ways, I think the media really shows how that race, class, and gender emerge in and intersect, specifically through when the famous people bought the dolls, and obviously they were girl dolls that were white, and that's why all of these white women were coming in with their children to come and get white female dolls, because that was what was prized. And whenever there was no white babies left, and all of the lighter skin ethnicities like Asians and Hispanics were already sold, they reverted to the ugly monster nubbins that was essentially disabled before they would go for the cute Black or African American children, which is honestly so sad and points again to stereotypical racial roles, which I wrote about in my notes, how Hispanics are seen as workers for these upper class people, especially in New York. Like, Hispanics would be maids and gardeners, as mentioned. Like, did your child get knocked up by Juan the gardener? They didn't want any type of negative thing to be associated with their child because they had a different skin colored child, a fake baby doll that they were carrying around, because these women were so obsessed, being of a higher class, were so obsessed with their reputations in society, for sure. And so I also wanted to talk about how some women tried to be like politically correct and tried to almost mask the fact that they held prejudice inside of them, which we've talked about throughout this class. But some women were more direct, like the woman who was holding the Bergdorf bag. So I kind of see this as there is like the wealthy and then there's the ultra wealthy, and then when you have so much wealth and you're in this ultra wealthy class, you're so privileged and you think that you can just get whatever you want, and so you undermine others. So the woman who is ultra wealthy does this in a way by saying, you don't have any white babies left, like just straight up. She doesn't even try to be politically correct. She just is not ashamed of her prejudice. She holds these values and is probably very open about them as well. And this is evident as in her daughter, who is influenced by her all of the time, shares these beliefs and does not want the child, presumably because they are, one, a boy, and two, are a monster baby. As she said that she wouldn't take care of it and wanted to name it Stupid. And the fact that that baker had to wrap Nubbins up in a pink blanket instead of a blue blanket further reinforces the fact that like kind of like this like hierarchy like in the dolls of it has to be perfect, it has to be this way, or it's not right, further enforcing the idea of the privilege that these upper classes have. And then what does this story tell us about the sociological understandings of race, class, and gender? It tells us that in these high societies, such as New York City, that whenever you're in like these upper class standings, people like have no shame, and they basically flaunt their privilege out for everyone to see, and because they have privilege themselves, they aren't concerned with those who are not as privileged as them, which in society today tends to be racial minorities, such as African Americans. And it also tells us that gender roles are still continually enforced in society today, where men are still expected to be the boss while women are still expected, even in this situation where they're acting, to submit and basically put on a show for these people all of the time and be very performative, while the males can kind of just say, oh, you have to do this, you have to do that, and boss these women around. So I think that overall this Toy Story is a really advanced symbol of our society as a whole, and how some people in some societies, such as this high status society, prejudice is so normalized that it's just like expected for these workers to know that they don't want a white baby, they don't want a black baby, or they don't want an Asian baby, they want a white baby. And the lack of understanding in these communities is just like the saying, ignorance is bliss, and they'll never fully be able to understand what is occurring in their society. Thank you.